Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video, and it's tier list time. The midnight beta is coming out, and obviously a lot of players have been coming into my streams and asking me, what is the best class? What's the most fun class? And I'm getting completely overwhelmed from it because there hasn't been a huge amount of testing available in the alpha, especially when it comes to PvP. So in today's video, I wanted to make a speculative prediction tier list on where these specs are going to reside, basically on day one of the beta, which we're hopefully going to have more extensive testing. I'm really hoping like skirmishes and solo shuffle and battleground blitz even possibly are going to be available to queue like they were in the War Within beta, because there was actually a lot of extensive testing done by the community back then. So hopefully all that will be up and running, but I'm going to do my best to use the information available, which is class changes, ability pruning, kind of historical data as well, based on which specializations tend to do better at the beginning of an expansion relative to the end of the expansion. These types of details I think can be important to try and triangulate in on which specs are likely going to look good at the start of the beta and which ones may be struggling. Also, depending on which specs still look like they're very significantly under construction and likely will need more time in order to address. But as always, if you want to make sure that you're staying up to date with news related to World of Warcraft, educational and entertaining content, then make sure to smash that subscribe button. Now, the first specialization here, I've got the most controversial ones up first, which is Mage. Now, in PvP, almost all of the Mage specs are going to have to cast significantly more, which means they have to be stationary. They're losing a lot of defensive cooldowns between mass barrier, invisibility damage reduction, mirror image damage reduction. They're losing a lot of mobility. They're going to have to be more stationary. These are all effectively nerfs, right? If we think about the way that the game is played now, but even if we think about the way that the game is likely going to be played, which their intent is to slow down the one-shots. Now, they have said that they want to slow down the one-shots in many patches before this, and sometimes they hit that, and then one-shots sneak back into the game a little bit later. So if we go off history, the one-shots are probably going to come back. They are also changing diminishing returns significantly, removing the third diminishing return, and that does affect Mage because it does have polymorph. So you're not going to be able to peel, indefinitely. So you're going to move less, take more damage, and not be able to peel indefinitely. These all don't sound really good right off the rip, right? These all don't sound very good. So if I had to guess, right, as a whole, across the board, I would anticipate Fire Mage to be, lower ranking at the moment, especially because this is a ranged class that focuses around a heavy amount of haste. You don't have a lot of haste at the start of a patch. I would assume that Mage specs are probably going to be a bit weaker. I do think Frost is likely going to be a cut ahead because Frost is the best, in my opinion, into melee DPS. And it still has a significant amount of instant damage, although most of that damage is now being pushed into Ray of Frost. And as more damage goes into that, then maybe you'll feel weaker. But I would kind of expect that Arcane and Fire likely feel a lot weaker, or just Mage across the board is going to feel weaker, at least in the initial stage of the beta. Remember, this doesn't mean it's the end of the world for your spec and you can't play it anymore. This is just an idea where I think they're going to lie, and I'm sure that they will make changes as things go on, because they have been related to all of the feedback that's been going so far. So hopefully with the beta, we'll get more PvP feedback in order to get more PvP focused attention. But I would anticipate Mage to feel weaker initially. Now, Demonology, I kind of think is going to be a giga OP spec if they go with the build that they just released for Demonology, where you can get Singe Magic and still have a Felguard, so 15-second cooldown Magic Dispel, or a Spell Lock and an Axe Toss. You have a tremendous amount of disruption. The damage output seems remarkably high with the changes that they've made and the instant Dreadstalkers. So unlike Mage, a lot of your kit's going more instant, and you're getting more utility on top of it. Also, Demonology, I think, is one of the best lock specs into melee. It's a little more durable. Has better lockdown also for holding targets. It didn't really get pruned too much in that regard with Axe Toss and Coil. And, the three diminishing returns things does affect Fear. But I think it's more so like, did Stun and Coil DR with Fear? No, it didn't change any of that. So Demonology, I think, will likely still feel very good. Destruction Warlock's a hard one because I don't think it's receiving a huge amount of like core changes, but we're going to be losing a lot of haste. So I kind of expect it to be maybe kind of more mid than it is at the moment, which is like, probably S tier in the current patch. I would expect casters to feel a little bit weaker. Also, Destro doesn't do too well with like warriors and enhancements or LEs typically, and those do look like they could be good. So this is a little bit more of a conservative point in terms of its power output for now. Affliction Warlock, again, this got a pretty big touch up. A lot of it is still under construction, so very hard to tell If we end up playing Drain Soul, then the Shadow Bolt proc build will kind of fall off, and Shadow Bolt proc has been kind of carrying Affliction at the moment. But again, we're moving into what they're aiming to be a sustained damage meta. So if they achieve that, Affliction Warlock is the top dog when it comes to sustained damage. But it's a matter if they can, attain that with the tuning knobs that they have available. So I would imagine that the tuning that I've done in 1v1s, it appears to be pretty slow, right? Like, and if a 1v1 is slow, imagine if you have a healer. So maybe they'll be able to hit that. I'm going to be a little bit more reserved with casters. I think it's probably the best of the B tier. Remember, this tier list goes top to bottom, left to right. So the ones on top are better than the ones below. The ones on the left are better than the ones on the right, and so on. Shadow Priest. This one's a tough one. You're losing your stun, which I think is a big loss in more like solo play PvP. And they're nerfing rogue stuns also, at least the availability of how many they have. So losing that does lower your synergy with a lot of stuff. But you're still very tanky. You basically didn't lose any of your defensive mitigation, unlike Mage. You kept Fade, you've kept Desperate Prayer, you've kept basically everything. Vampiric Embrace, your entire defensive kit's still there. It's just basically your stun is gone. And Catharsis, I guess, is also gone. So your instant damage is kind of lower. But again, if it's a sustained damage meta, Shadow could be really good. But I'm going to be a little bit more reserved with this. Maybe I could see it being a bit better than Affliction just because it's tankier. That's the only thing. I'll be even more reserved. I'll put it on B tier for right now just to keep up with the trend again, because this is a lot of speculation, right? There's a lot of speculation, but we need a point on the chart to triangulate in on, so that when we go in and we actually test it, then we can go and relate it to where I've currently put it, and we can move things and wiggle them around. So we need a starting point. Boomkin, I do actually think will be good. It's basically lost nothing other than the third diminishing return, which can be critical at sometimes, but it's keeping pretty much everything else. It's lost renewal, I guess, but you just have a passive renewal that's going to be healing you instead. I think Boomkin likely is probably the best of all the casters. It also does pretty well into melee DPS, still has a pretty instant-based damage kit as far as I can see. Maybe that'll shift. We'll see as time goes on. I got to honestly spend more time with Boomkin. I've been spending too much time with other specs and looking at the changes that they've gotten. I'm hoping the Elun's Chosen build actually ends up being the best one. They're bringing back Star Surge procs. I think it's when you cast Wrath or Starfire, it has a chance to just shoot a Star Surge. Although it says on a random target, and there's a lot of pets, so anything that's random target, I'm a bit concerned about. But I think its baseline kit is still really good. Although the haste loss, it could actually affect its viability. It really depends on its damage profile. If it's Starfall AoE damage, sustained damage, and it's not instantly exploding, so you don't need to be spamming Cyclone every millisecond, then it could be good. But if you do need to be spamming Cyclone and the haste is low, then maybe it suffers a bit. Elemental Shaman, this is also a hard one. I think mostly losing Ice Fury is losing access to just an extra instant hit of damage. You also have to choose now between Earthshock and Elemental Blast. I don't know which one's going to end up being better. I would imagine Earthshock in PvP. You're still decently tanky, but you did lose Stone Bulwark Totem. So this is such a hard one. It really depends on the frequency of your procs. I would imagine that Ellie and Boomy probably initially feel a little bit better. These are kind of the casters that can deal with melee a little bit more effectively, just due to their mobility, and they're still keeping a lot of their roots and their crowd control effects that the other classes are losing. Although I guess Lightning Lasso, I think it's becoming a PvP talent. I don't know if Ellie can actually afford to take that. Losing Lasso could be a big deal. This is a lot harder. Ellie is a lot harder. I'm going to leave it there just because that's where I'm kind of feeling it at the moment. This one might come as a surprise, but I think Dev Evoker could be S tier. I think that your natural born enemies are mages and rogues, and they're both getting targeted pretty effectively. And so if you don't die 100-0 in a stun, Dev Evoker does crazy sustained damage in a metagame like that, and it does really well into melee DPS, which typically the first season of an expansion is a little bit more melee dominant. Means that I think Dev Evoker could be strong. Remember, this is likely going to all change significantly. Augmentation, I haven't seen it all. I mean, if I wanted to take a guess, I'd say it's probably somewhere up with Dev, but I have not spent any time with it, so I'd rather just leave it there for now. I also kind of consider Aug almost like a tank spec at this point, as far as its own viability. Beast Mastery Hunter, it's really simple and easy to play. Where do I think its viability is, though? I think it's probably better than a lot of the casters, mostly just because it can still do instant damage on the run. but you're losing a lot of roots is what I'm concerned about. You're losing scattershot and roots. So your ability to like control multiple enemies and actually get away from them, I think it's going to be significantly lower. I do think BM will probably be better than Marksman though, so I'll put it on A tier to have like a distinct difference. Marksman Hunter I kind of expect to be like somewhere here. But now again, I've not seen any ranked tuning, but with 3-second aim shots, losing all of your roots, losing your ability to scatter melee off of yourself, that doesn't sound good, right? Like just be straight up with that. When I describe that doesn't sound very good. And if they want it to be a sustained damage meta and you're a burst class, typically that's not good for you. You don't fit into that meta very well. So I think that's probably a safe initial point for it. And maybe I'm completely wrong on this and we get in, and because these numbers could be totally random when we actually start playing, but this is just my initial thoughts. Survival Hunter, again, big risks we're taking with this spec. It's losing a lot of the control of the other Hunter specs. Similarly, I don't know how its damage profile is going to fit, especially if you end up using the shotgun spell. I'm spacing out on the name, Boomstick, I think, because it's like Fist of Fury. So if you get stunned on it and as you get stopped, you lose all your damage. I guess you did it technically a Fury of the Eagle before. I would kind of expect Survival initially, at least, to be a little bit more mid. I think I reserve this opinion a little bit because you do still have significant range damage with wildfire bombs. I'm just mostly worried about your survivability, lack of control and lack of survivability, at least in the initial stages. Havoc Demon Hunter. Oh, I need to add Devourer. I didn't add Devourer to this list. We'll have to create like a wild card to say, we'll use the Vengeance icon as if it's Devourer. But Havoc Demon Hunter, I feel like it's probably just going to end up being the same. It's such a well-rounded spec that it's very hard for me to believe that it wouldn't be good. I'm going to at least have it here on A tier when we start looking at some other things, but it's just really well-rounded. I think it's still durable. I guess losing the dodge component of your blur, though, is something you might want to consider. So you're going to be a bit weaker into melee attackers, but I think you get 2 charges of it now. So a bit weaker into melee attackers, but a bit stronger into casters, and honestly being stronger into casters in first season, maybe not the best, especially if the casters are on the weaker side. Feral Druid, just easier to play. They removed Blood Talents, just basically more straightforward to play the spec as far as differences from last patch to this patch. So probably, a similar position. I'll leave it on A tier. Although at the same time, again, it depends on if it's a one-shot meta. If it's a sustain meta, you do bleed damage, crazy sustain. So if they can hit that mark, I would expect you to do well. Assassination Rogue. Now, Cheap Shot was the main thing that was nerfed with Rogue, limiting the number of charges of Cheap Shot, but you still have Garrote. So being able to combo those together to lock down a target, I think is going to be quite effective. And also, you're kind of one of the best like overall sustained damage specs when it comes to Rogue. So if I had to guess on day one of the beta, that Assa Rogue will probably be the go-to initially. This could be completely wrong, again, and don't think that this is set in stone. I'm sure that they will likely make huge amounts of changes. This is just my idea is to try and answer your guys' questions because you guys keep asking them about what is the strongest at the moment. It's really hard to tell you that because there's just basically no data. Outlaw Rogue, sustained damage is not great. We've not seen a lot as far as updates for Rogue in general. If I had to guess, I wouldn't put it too high, especially because it's main synergies with Mage. I just don't see it being too high. I could see it like maybe even possibly D tier, but I'll leave it on C tier for now. You're losing I guess the other thing too is losing the current set bonuses. And the new set bonuses, well, actually the Rogue, the Assassination one is like straight Garrote damage. I think it's not that bad actually. I think Outlaw will feel weaker. I think Subtlety Outlaw, I think Rogue Mage in general will probably feel weaker. Subtlety, they're taking like a lot of risks with it, and I haven't seen anybody testing it to know if they're paying off or not. They're changing the way that haste works. They're removing the cooldown reduction. I feel safer putting it on the lower end of an initial test right now, just because they made such huge changes to it, and I've seen almost nobody talking about it or trying it. So I would expect it probably feels worse initially with the changes that are being applied to it, because mostly it's just a cooldown reduction. Fury Warrior, I've not seen too much. Mostly been arms. And honestly, I'm slapping arms up here. Now, arms is one of the best melee into a melee meta. And again, season 1 is usually melee dominant, so you're going to look good there. You have high self-healing coming into your class. They prune some mobility, basically. Like Avatar doesn't remove roots, and they've removed the talent where when you Avatar, you wreck, and you wreck, you Avatar, which also was an extra root break. A lot of your mobility is coming down a bit, but again, the crowd control is coming down equally. So you'll probably feel really good. And mostly defense survivability and the fact that it's the best spec in melee meta, in my opinion, at least when it comes to melee. So I think it'll end up being somewhere up here. Fury Warrior, I think, likely has a similar level of survivability, but it's a bit weaker in the cleave meta, so I would put it a bit behind in the initial testing phase. I don't know why Paladin Evoker snuck up here into the melee part of the tier list, but let's drag him down there. Little Blood DK is trying to sneak in here as well. Frost DK, I have not seen a huge amount, mostly Unholy. But again, Frost DK does really good in the melee meta, but it's not a burst meta if they can achieve that. But on day one, with what I would assume is very limited PvP tuning done up to this point, maybe it could be really good on day one. I'll put it a little lower just because it usually tends to not come in. It's either super hot or super not. So come in a little bit on the safer side here in the middle of the pack. Unholy DK I could see being decent. I don't think it's better than Warrior though right now. But I could definitely see it up here with Demon Hunter, with its current play style, with the current damage output. It's got a good burst. Chains of Ice really effective for melee and just kind of kiting away from them. But if it's like a Warrior Windwalker meta, this is another thing to consider is like natural born enemies. Some specs naturally counter others. So Windwalker and Arms Warrior usually are difficult for DK. Arms Warrior looks really good right now. Windwalker a little bit tougher to say though. Ret Paladin, this is a big one, right? Now, I think the biggest reason that Ret could actually see a fall from grace is the loss of a lot of crowd control. You can't get Repentance at all. I think you have to choose now between Blinding Light and Searing Glare. So basically losing all the annoying crowd controls that you have, but your damage is still high, and you're one of the highest sustained damage specs in the game even right now. So, maybe you fall from S, but I don't know if you'll fall that far. I think it's safer to leave it on A tier for like overall ladder experience. There's a lot of stuff coming in on A tier, even with this being completely speculative. But I think the crowd control hit is likely where you're going to feel the biggest change. So things that like you needed Repentance to win, that stuff's just going to run you over. So like honestly, things like Mistweaver get a lot stronger as a result of that, because that's like an example of where Repentance would feel like very mandatory. Or if you're playing with a class as Sphere or Cyclone, now you just don't have any crowd control to help them. But your sustained damage is really high. I do imagine Mortal Strike is going to have it already has a very high dependency right now, but I think it's going to be 100% mandatory, at least initially, but it could depend on tuning. Enhancement Shaman, I think still the biggest issue is just lack of mobility. No, the changes to it, the rework to it looks really good. I think they're simplifying down the button bloat, making the rotation feel a little bit better. But you still have mobility issues. But in a melee meta, you can sometimes be one of the best specs to synergize with a Warrior. So you may want to take that into account. I'm going to be a little bit more conservative, though, with my Enhancement Shaman placement here. Now, where do I want to put it, though? This one's a little bit more random, I'll be honest. I'm going to put it on B tier because I just think I don't know if it'll compete with these, and we're filling up the A tier a little bit too hot. Windwalker Monk. I feel like it's all or nothing with this. Like, I thought they were trying to move away from the cooldown playstyle, but from the testing on the training dummies, it looks like it's all about Zenith, which is the new cooldown. You're losing Diffuse Magic. Basically, it's getting baked into Fortifying Brew. So you have to like all in on that. I guess sometimes Windwalkers just forget to use defensive, so now this way you won't forget, but you're using it at the same time, which I think is actually weaker. But you do well typically into melee. You typically struggle with like Paladins, Mages, and Hunters, right? So the fact that Hunters and Mages are getting their roots removed, getting the mobility stripped down a lot, means melee will likely be, I would imagine, pretty dominant. So I'll put it maybe here on B tier, the best of the B tier for now. But I do kind of expect, maybe I should even drag casters even further down. Do we drag the casters even further down? Maybe we do. Do we drag them down into the dust? Something like this, maybe. I think Shadow might still be. It's getting some interesting talents with Psychic Scream, where you go like immune to CC after you Psychic Screams, and so you can like fear DPS, and they're adding Void Tendrils to the fear too, so you can like fear root things. And a lot of classes are losing the root break, so that might be a bit more effective for you compared to the other melee. Although I feel like Frost should still be up here. I think Frost might be one of the few that can compete with the turning tides of the melee, but we'll drag the rest of the list down a bit here. Paladin Evoker. Now again, crowd control, nerfs to Hunters and Mages is good for Prez, and nerfs to Rogue. So I would imagine that Prez feels good just off of that alone. Holy Priest, maybe not so much, because you synergize very well with Rogues and Mages. And you don't really with warriors. And I do think warrior will likely be coming up towards the top, so put it kind of more in the middle of the pack. Paladin, they're taking huge risks with, and from the testing, it looks like you're more of like a Fistweaver style of play, which could be really good in a sustained damage meta where crowd control is limited, and you've been countered by Mage for a while. It's getting nerfed. That is a tough one. Holy Paladin is a tough one. I feel safer giving it a lower ranking to begin with, where I anticipate it to be, but this is again all speculation, so could be totally wrong. But that's just where my vibes are going. I've been playing the game for many, many years and seen many, many patches, and my vibes are telling me that it might be a little bit lower. Discipline Priest is a very tough one because you're losing all the haste, so I can't imagine Void Weaver is going to be even remotely as good. You don't do well with warriors is like the main thing, and I don't think those synergy things are going away anytime soon. So if warrior ends up upticking, which I think it should based on what I've seen, probably kind of mid. Mistweaver, on the other hand, you're one of the best healers in a melee DPS. Grapple weapon, ports, really high throughput. You just hate crowd control, and all those classes are getting nerfed. So, this could be a bold statement, but like if I had to guess based on the direction of the meta that I'm seeing, I would think Mistweaver could actually end up being really good. Maybe one of the best healers to like try out on the initial stage of the beta. Remember, the point of this tier list is like get an idea of it for testing and then get in there, see if it's right at all, give the feedback, and then hopefully have balance changes so that everybody is as closely balanced as possible so that it's almost indistinguishable, right? That's the goal of this tier list. It's not meant to make you feel bad or make you feel like you need to play this spec or that spec, and it could be totally wrong, so definitely don't. It's just to give you an idea of where I think the specs are fitting in, at least at the start of the beta. Resto Druid, this is a hard one. I think Resto does do well in melee meta. I think it does worse into like casters with multi-dots, depending on the pacing of the game. So I could see Resto Druid. I think it's probably safer to go kind of middle of the pack, though. Resto Shaman, they're pruning so much stuff, and your wind shear is going to a 30-second cooldown, so you're not as like caster countery, but mind you, there aren't even going to be probably a lot of casters, at least initially anyways. They removed Earthen Wall Totem. I don't know where your healing output sits with all of those cooldowns removed, basically, if you can keep up with damage or not. That is the difficulty of where I want to rank Resto Shaman, and we still have to do Devourer. But Resto Shaman, again, my brain from this season is also playing tricks on me on wanting to rank it a little bit higher. You don't really add a lot of damage is the only thing that I think it's probably better to put it on B. I feel like damage output could be an issue for you, especially if it just ends up being about like overall damage. And now finally, we're using Vengeance here as the Devourer icon because this tier list maker doesn't have Devourer yet. Devourer is the new spec. It's like a pseudo ranged melee hybrid. I don't think it's going to be that great. Now the Void Blade build that I tested on it seemed much better than the I-Beam build. So maybe the Void Blade build will be good. But I feel like a lot of the talents are also bugged, so you might play it on the first day, and there's a talent that's supposed to make Collapsing Star uninterruptible. It doesn't work. You just get stunned on a kick that it doesn't stop interrupts. So you'll just not be able to get Collapsing Star. So I imagine it does not feel very good. Put it down here for melee DPS right now, at least initially in PvP. Could be totally wrong. This is a speculative list based off the abilities that they've pruned, based off the natural synergies and natural kind of food chain of these classes when they go up against each other, to give you the best idea that I can of where these specs are going to sit on day one of the beta. And I'm sure that this is going to evolve and change dramatically. Maybe it won't. Maybe I'm just a god of predictions. We will wait and see, because I will be updating this as the beta goes on, for the purposes of trying to help balance the tuning to get the classes as close as possible, basically, before the game actually goes live. And then you're going to care about it, because this is all going to change. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Just a little fun one, a little speculation. Thank you guys very much for tuning in and hanging out with me for this. I hope that it's at least helped you get an idea of where I could see the game moving, as far as trying to pick your spec. But don't just pick your spec 100% based off of what I'm telling you, right? If you think something looks really fun, don't let this tier list deter you from it. But other than that, thank you guys very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.